2 days of campaigning to go now. The polls are tightening, both the Resolve poll in the nine group newspapers, also the Essential polling in The Guardian. And there are two big questions remaining unanswered on the Labor side. I'll explain those to you tonight and show you just how Anthony Albanese is ducking them, actually trying to postpone them till after the election. But let's be clear about what's going on here. Albanese and Labor went into this campaign comfortably ahead in the polls. He's had a shocker of a campaign, offering very little by way of policy, making basic errors on essential facts and on his own policies. Albanese has been shrinking before our very eyes, but so far at least, voters haven't turned away from him, at least according to the polls. Now, the polls are tightening, as I say, but to be sure, they still spell trouble for the government. The primary vote for the government is still too low, so Labor remain the front runners. So either one of two things is happening here. Either voters had already decided it was time to switch governments, and the campaign, and Labor's appalling campaign really, has been largely pointless, or there is a hardening of support towards Scott Morrison and the coalition, as many of us expected, and the polls have only picked up the very beginnings of that. And so the question then becomes whether it will be strong enough to save the day for the coalition come Saturday. We'll know, of course, on Saturday night, or perhaps a few days later, if it's super tight in some of the key seats. But in the meantime, Labor is yet to release its policy costings. They won't even confirm that their deficits and debt will be higher than the government's. And they'll announce details of all their costings tomorrow after the political advertising ban kicks in. What a coincidence, hey? So the play here from Labor is pretty cynical, isn't it? They are desperate to get through the next couple of days with as little scrutiny as possible. And one hurdle was today's appearance by Anthony Albanese at the National Press Club. But there is one elephant in the room that's received far too little attention in this campaign. Labor is committed to having a second budget this year. If they win, there will be another budget later this year. They won't wait till next year. Now, why would you plan a second budget unless you plan to cut some spending or perhaps add some taxes or even scrap some planned tax cuts? So Albanese today was asked by our own Andrew Clennell whether he guaranteed that Labor would not scrap the third stage of income tax cuts that Labor initially opposed, then accepted, and which have now been legislated to happen in the middle of 2024.
Labor supported. We had amendments there, but once they were not successful, we voted for the legislation of the tax cuts, and we said clearly and explicitly we would keep those legislated tax cuts because people deserve that certainty going forward. But what we'll also do is craft a whole agenda for how you grow the economy.
OK, so he points out they've said they'll keep them, but he also says he'll craft a whole agenda for the economy. Craft a whole agenda. That's what you're supposed to do in the election campaign. But Labor wants to be elected first, then they'll craft a whole agenda for the economy. This is dynamite. In fact, on day one, an Albanese Labor government will be a bit like Kevin Rudd's government. They'll have summits looking for ideas, or at least looking to get some cover to push the ideas they really want.
And one of the first things I will do if I'm elected Prime Minister on Saturday is to bring business, employer groups and unions, civil society groups together in an employment summit here in Canberra to collaborate on secure work and ensure enterprise bargaining is working more effectively.
No. The idea is to formulate policies and craft a whole agenda on the economy before the election and tell voters about it before they cast their votes. So Labor will have a summit and a second budget before the end of the year. This sounds like cover to either scrap legislated income tax cuts for Middle Australia or perhaps introduce new taxes. But Anthony Albanese would give no real clarity today. And while Andrew Clennell tried to pursue the issue, listen to the way this green left cabal of Canberra journalists shuts down and even laughs off one of the most important election questions.
My entire political career has been built on my word.
Yeah, just quickly.
No, sorry.
No new taxes.
No.
Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, Andrew. Sit down. Andrew. Anna Henderson.
No new taxes.
Oh, how hilarious, hey? It's only about your taxes. It's only about being honest with voters. We might never find out. But if Labor does win on Saturday, odds are those stage 3 tax cuts will go the same way as the thylacine. And there's another big area where Labor are hiding their true intentions: the pandemic. We know that Labor, state and federal, has been the party of lockdowns, of hard borders, of mandates and draconian controls. The Liberals have been bad enough, to be sure, but Labor's been the anti-freedom party on this stuff. And we thought all those days were behind us. But there are some leftist journalists who have been agitating about the pandemic on social media, demanding to know why we aren't talking about it more, saying it should be an election issue. And a couple in the press pack got some questions to the Prime Minister today.
We're approaching 6,000 deaths so far this year. Was a decision taken that this is an acceptable number? And if not, what are you doing to stop 50 deaths from COVID a day in Australia?
What are you doing to curtail that, and will you extend a 4th booster to the whole population to protect them?
Yeah, they want to talk up the fear here, talk up what's going on with the pandemic and demand that the Prime Minister fixes it. And the Prime Minister's answers were pretty much what you'd want to hear. First, putting COVID deaths into context.
And there were some 53,000 case numbers yesterday. And what you see when you have case numbers at that level is that people, when they pass away from many other causes, they will die with COVID, and their deaths are recorded as COVID deaths. But that doesn't necessarily mean, as the premiers themselves have set out, that they passed away because of COVID.
Yeah, COVID's an ongoing problem, but for now and probably forever, COVID will be appearing on some death certificates. That's the new normal. And the Prime Minister declared he'll continue to take medical advice and promote vaccines, of course, but he's not for turning.
We're living with COVID. I'll tell you what we're not going back to. We're not going back to those daily press conferences of people talking about COVID every day and putting the threat of shutdowns and lockdowns and interfering in people's lives again. I'll tell you, that's not what I'm going to do if I'm re-elected on Saturday. I'm not going to drag Australia back into those times again. I've noticed that Anthony Albanese is keen to get back into that type of approach. That's not the approach I've taken.
So naturally enough, the Labor leader was asked about this today, and again, rather than tell us what he'd do, he said he was going to work that out, work out what he should do later. He'd go to work on putting together a national strategy after he's elected. And of course, he talked up the threat of the pandemic.
What can we do to minimise the impact of COVID, which is continuing to have an ongoing impact on people? Sometimes too, people, not just vulnerable people. There's a lot of younger people can have an impact as well, are in hospital. We need to continue to be vigilant and recognise that this pandemic is still having a real human impact.
Oh, really? We're still getting into let's scare people about young people with the pandemic now. And he says if he's elected, he'll come up with a national strategy. We don't know what it is. So what would Labor do on taxes? Why is it planning another budget later this year? And what would it do differently on pandemic management? Extraordinarily, we're supposed to wait until after the election to get answers to these questions. I reckon we should know now.